Turn my volume off.
That's how you use a gavel.
It's a little too strong.
So good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting of the March
18th Williston Select Board meeting to order.
I'm Town Manager Eric Wells, and per the town charter, I am presiding over the meeting until the election of officers occur. I don't know if that's the speaker, Andrew. Oh, there we go. That's better. So welcome everyone. To open the meeting, I'd just like to thank the community for its support of the town budget in the ERF article at town meeting. Also congratulate members Beckett and Kenny on their election at town meeting to the select board, and welcome members D'Agostino, Jensen, and Isham back on the board. So look forward to working with the select board ahead for your business year leading up to town meeting 2026. And I will not filibuster here much longer. I will go to the next order of business, which is the call for the election of a chair of the select board. Are there any nominations?
Nominate Ted Kenny.
I second.
Are there any nominations?
I nominate Ellie Beckett.
Looks like she's declining.
She's declining.
So
nomination and a second for Ted Kenny. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
we have it.
Have it. Carter says Ted, on your election as chair of the.
Next order for vice chair. So yes, thanks. The next order of business is the election of vice chair. Are there any nominations?
Nominate Greta D'Agostino.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any other nominations? Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Hearing no nays, the ayes have it. Greta D'Agostino.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
next minutes, although before I do that, I would like to say that, Rick McGuire, when Rick McGuire was town manager, he always gave a little speech at this moment. And Eric, Rick McGuire used to give a speech when he had the chance that you had right there. Just saying.
I'll have to wait till next year.
You have a whole year to write it, so.
So minutes of February 18th, is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the pending modifications.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Going through it, page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Hearing no modifications, all those in favor of adopting the minutes say aye.
Aye.
There are no nays, the ayes have it. One abstention would be Ellie?
Yeah.
Okay. Next, public comment. This is a moment where people who wish to make a public comment, it does not have to be anything on the agenda, although it can be. So I see, come on up. And everybody knows everybody's name, but for the record, if you can state your name and before you begin.
Thank you. I'm Rob Mahalik, and I'm a Williston resident. And I'm appearing here as the volunteer chair of the executive board of the Williston Community Justice Center, which is actually right next door for people who don't know that. And right now, we're actually conducting restorative justice panels as we speak here. The reason why I'm here tonight, and I just want to give you a little bit of background. I actually moved to Vermont in 1977, and I moved right on Mountain View Road in a little ranch house right next to the Martell farm. So my connections go back that far, and I've lived here for over 25 years. I moved around Vermont a little bit, but I've been here for 25 years. So I'm deeply involved in the community, in terms of my own life. And the volunteer work that I do for the Community Justice Center is very meaningful. So really quickly, why we're here tonight is we want to present to the select board and town management some questions and concerns that the executive board of the Community Justice Center has as it relates to Act 180, and the state legislature was passed last year. And what that does is for, I'm sure everybody knows, but just to kind of put it for the record, it's going to change the way community justice centers have been operating. The plan right now is for fiscal FY26 things should operate as they have in fiscal '25, except that the funding has not been approved at the State House. And we just saw Governor Scott veto what some would call the baby budget bill. So we don't really know what's going to happen. And so one of the questions, there's like two big bucket questions the executive board has is, what is the town's plan, contingency plans, if funding does not come through from the state for fiscal year '26? And we're not expecting an answer. This is a rhetorical question to find out if there are contingency plans, and if not, what might the timeline for that planning be if we don't have funding on July 1st of 2025? And the second bucket is for the next year, according to the Attorney General Office plan, there's going to be a planning process for Chittenden County. Right now, Chittenden County has 4 centers, one here in Williston, Essex, South Burlington, and Burlington. But the plan is going to be to consolidate that to one hub center in Burlington. So that puts Williston's work and center at risk in terms of what we provide now. And I just, real quickly, I just want to say the budget approval of one full-time social worker for the town is excellent, because we need, quite frankly, to do the work that the Community Justice Center has been doing, we would need 3.5 social workers to do that work. And the other part is, I know we have a contract with Howard Center, and the Howard Center has worked well with the Williston Police Department, but when it comes to the work of what the Community Justice Center does, Howard has not been able to provide the services nor the support that is needed. So what happens is that work falls to the Community Justice Center to deal with the human needs, the mental health interventions, the calls at 2 in the morning, the calls on Saturday, the calls on Sunday. Nobody is handling those calls right now except for the Community Justice Center. So with the advent of the central hub model in Burlington, there is a lot of risk of social needs gaps for the Williston community. And I know it's not necessarily your remit, but people may not know, the WCJC Center here in Williston serves Heinsberg, Richmond, Bolton, Huntington, St. George, the CBU school system, the MMU school system, and actually all of the attending school systems to that. And there are programs for restorative justice through those school systems. What happens to those cases? So what I'd like to do is, leave it there, because I know the public comment period is short, and I want to respect that. And I want to hand out to you a series of questions that the executive board at the Williston Community Justice Center has come up with. So I don't know if I just hand them, okay. Ellie, I'll just give this to you, just pass it along to someone sheet. And then I want to just also hand out, we've got a nice little, I would call it a primer, but nobody uses that word anymore. It's kind of an overview and a brief of what the Williston Community Justice Center does, because many people actually don't know what it does. And even if they know what it does, they might think it only does one thing, but it actually does a lot. So I'll pass this out to everybody too. Now, that's kind of what I wanted to present to you. I know we do have other community members here, and I don't know how you manage this particular public comment section, but those are that's all I had to say.
Okay, great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else wish to make a public comment? Does anybody else wish to make a public comment?
Hello.
I'm Marcy Cass, and I would like to speak in support of the Community Justice Center. And I would also like to read Carr's letter.
The email?
Yes, did you get that?
Yeah,
Yeah, we've all
and
got
I distributed it to everybody.
Oh, okay. So can I read that? Because it's, or is that not necessary?
Is there other stuff after that you want to say?
Yeah,
How long will you take?
I'm not going to take long at all.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so should I read Reed's letter?
It's up to you.
Okay. Dear Select People and Eric, I'm unable to attend the meeting tonight, so I'm submitting my public comment in writing. Please read into the record. My name is Reed Carr, and I'm writing as a Williston resident to express concern about the future of the Community Justice Center in Williston. Through research and conversations with those involved, it's my understanding that there are two fundamental issues that need to be addressed for this critical and effective town service to continue. One, funding for fiscal year 2026. State-level funding is not guaranteed, and the town currently does not have a Plan B identified to ensure funding for local CJC staff. The highly trained and committed CJC staff cannot possibly be expected to stick around for FY26 without addressing this issue. Leaving funding an unknown would lead any reasonable employee to seek employment elsewhere out of self-preservation. At town meeting, I asked the question, what options or levers should Williston residents expect to see the manager's office and select board exploring in the coming weeks to ensure guaranteed funding through FY26? The response I received was unsatisfactory, that it's too soon to say and we need to wait and see what happens. What I heard is it's not important enough to be working on a Plan B for. And then the second issue is functional and supportive relationship with the police department. From what I have gathered, it was not working well for CJC staff to report to the chief of police, and that the police department has had a neutral, at best, view of restorative justice and the CJC services. And for this reason, the executive director has been reporting to the town manager in recent months. Our police officers and detectives provide critical services to our town. But once a case has been created, we have a choice on how to move it forward. The court system is not proving efficient or effective, offers only a stick approach, and has long delays even for minor offenses. Restorative justice is a more cost-effective, humane, and rapid response mechanism for low-level offenses in our town that combines sticks and carrots for durable and immediate change in harmful behaviors. A collaborative relationship between the police department and CJC is in the best interest of all residents and businesses. I urge the Select Board and Manager's Office to immediately work on a proposal that creates a cooperative environment between departments and guaranteed funding for CJC staff through FY26. I strongly believe this is in everyone's best interest, and without it, we are almost sure to lose this critical service in town. Reed Carr. So I wanted to say that, so my husband is on the restorative justice part of the center, and he, I hear from him how wonderful it is, and I've heard also from other people too, and I just, it'd be a shame to lose this great thing. It's like a really good thing about Williston. So that would be a shame. I also, okay, so that's CJC, and I don't know if anyone else wants to say something about it? Okay. Because I want to say something about the library, so should I come back for that?
Well, it's up to you.
Do you want to say something about the CJC? Okay.
Okay.
So I know all of you, you all know me. I'm Sally Metro, and I'm the operations manager at the Food Shelf. We have worked directly with the Community Justice Center on many, many cases over the years. And I just wanted to let you know, because I know you serve and care about this community, that we have a lot of marginalized, barely coping, very functional individuals living in this town. Some are homeless, some are not. And I believe very strongly that we need the Community Justice Center to help us work with the people who are so marginalized before any crimes are committed. The one thing I want to say to you is that I invite each of you to come, not at the same time, to the food shelf on a Tuesday and spend 45 minutes with me there, or an hour. You'll meet some of these people, you'll see what some of their issues are, and it's important for you to see that, because the circles that you move in are not the circles that many of these people are in, and I think it's important that you know some of the people that are out there and what their troubles are. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Any other public comment? Did you want to do your library moment now? Or?
Library. So should I wait till the library issue comes up, or should I say it now?
You can wait, or you can say it now. There's no right or wrong to that. I'm sorry.
Depends if you want to hang around.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of other things. You'll get to learn about the Industrial Avenue Sidewalk project. So, yeah, why don't you stay? Yeah. All right. Okay. Any other public comment? Okay. Eric, is there anybody online?
Nope, none online.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Okay, next on the agenda, Select Board rules for transaction and the meeting schedule.
Yep. So continuing your reorganizational meeting business items, the town charter calls for the board to adopt rules of transaction at its organizational meeting each March, which is tonight. I've included with your agenda materials the rules of transaction drafted for 2025. I haven't made any suggested changes from the rules as they stood in 2024. You also have an attachment to that which outlines the meeting schedule for the select board over its business year. Nothing's changed there either, the first and third Tuesday of the month, except in August, the third Tuesday. Budget schedule with a Saturday review session in December, a month off, and then multiple meetings in January to finalize the warning leading up to town meeting. As always, that schedule can change. Other meetings can be added. Certainly, it's at the board's purview for your rules of transaction. If there's anything you'd like to change this evening.
Okay. Questions or comments from the board? Okay. If not, there is a proposed motion.
I move to adopt the Select Board rules of transaction and meeting schedule dated March 18th, 2025, for the term of the current Select Board ending in March of 2026.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Hearing no nays, the ayes have it. Motion passes. Next, designee for examining and allowing claims, the warrant.
Yep, so it's suggested the board designate one member and one alternate to sign warrants on behalf of the board. Warrants will be made available for informal review at regular board meetings and sent out to the full board using email as well, after signature by the board's designee. For folks listening in, warrants are just orders essentially paying the bills of the town. So the select board draws those orders, and then the town can issue checks after they're approved. So there's a resolution to consider with the agenda to designate a select board member and an alternate for that role, should the board decide to do so.
Jean?
Pick me, pick me.
I'd be happy to continue to serve.
I'm currently the alternate. If somebody else wants to be the alternate and learn about paying the bills.
It's not very onerous. It's not very onerous, given that I can
It's
do it
not.
remotely.
I'm happy to, if that's what you were asking.
It sounds like we have a primary and secondary person then. Yeah, we do need a motion, right? So I would invite a motion.
Move to appoint Jean Jensen as the designate for examining and allowing claims, and Ellie Beckett as the alternate.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Hearing no nays, the ayes have it. Next item, Industrial Avenue Sidewalk Project, public meeting. Christine?
Yeah, so and we also have Eric Alling joining us from Stantec. Eric, I'll connect you right now. You'll be able to share your audio and video. So this is a sidewalk project the town's preparing for to fill a gap on Industrial Avenue. This project's received grant funding from VTrans, and this is a public information session as required by our grant funding. Construction is estimated to be completed in the fall of 2026, and I'll turn it over to our Public Works staff and our project consultant.
Hi, Christine Doherty, Assistant Director of Public Works. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to be here today. As Eric informed, this is a public information meeting that we are required to provide for a project that we're trying to get constructed here in the next couple of years for sidewalk section along Industrial Avenue. We do have Eric Allen with Stantec online here, who'll be walking us through some of the project. So I'd like to give him the opportunity to kind of walk through the project where we are right now. We're still in the early design phase of the project, and then open it up for any questions after that.
Great. So Eric has a presentation?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, let me share my screen,
Be a little louder.
and please let me know when you can see that.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Christine. We'll start here just for a brief minute before we get into it. I just wanted to highlight this picture on the opening slide. This is Industrial Ave looking towards the Williston Road intersection. And you can see sort of towards the back of the picture, the existing sidewalk, and the project we're here to talk about tonight kind of comes from that point towards the camera. So we've got a project team for the design of this project, and from the town, it's Bruce and Christine from the Public Works Department. At Stantec, it's myself, Israel, and Kayla working on the design end of things, and then we have a contact at VTrans, Nydia Lugo, who is the project supervisor. This is going to be a brief presentation tonight, but a quick overview of what we'll cover is we'll very briefly go through the project development process, take a look at our project area, some of the existing conditions and the proposed design, and we'll wrap it up by talking about what comes next. So we are talking about the southeasterly side of Industrial Ave. As I mentioned, there's an existing sidewalk that was just built last year as part of the intersection improvement project. And so we pick up from that point and we go to Whitecap. This is based on a 2012 scoping study that recommended sidewalk for the entire length of Industrial Ave. And this supports the town's overall goals of having alternative transportation forms rather than vehicles. So this is how projects typically play out. Start in project definition, which was that scoping study I told you about back in 2012. Based on the results of that scoping study, the town was able to secure a grant through the VTrans Transportation Alternatives Grants Program. And that funding will cover both the design and construction of the sidewalk. Here's a little bit closer look in some of the existing conditions. I'm sure everybody here is pretty familiar with Industrial Ave, but the speed limit is 30 miles an hour. Roughly 8,100 vehicles a day travel along it. It's pretty wide, about 40 feet of pavement. It's mostly commercial and industrial areas. And it does have newly constructed sidewalk on one end. And then it will stop at Whitecap, and then there'll be one last segment that will be designed and built as part of a future project. That would take it up to Rossignol Park. And so here's our project, and I can make this a little bit bigger and easier to see. A couple of things to keep in mind as we're looking at these slides. The green is sort of the overall impacts of the project. The charcoal is the sidewalk itself. And then the green will be sort of clearing and limits that might get damaged by construction equipment and will be seeded and have turf established at the end of the project. Also important to see this pink line here is the existing right-of-way line. So the town owns everything towards the roadway. Any work on this project that happens outside of that line, the town will need to get easements from the respective property owners. And finally, this sort of squiggly line is the tree clearing line. So for those familiar with this part of Industrial Ave, there are quite a few trees close to the road, and some of those will need to be removed to make way for the sidewalk. So as we start this is the Williston Road intersection side of the project. Now you can see that project is newer even than this ortho photo, so the new sidewalk does not show on it, but it does end right here. That sidewalk has curb right up against the sidewalk with no grass strip, but our project will have a grass strip. So as it starts, it'll taper away from the road to make room for that grass strip. But a little bit of clearing through here, avoid the existing sign. The sidewalk will carry across Aston Johnson Drive. A little more clearing. We'll go on to the next slide. Camp where we left off, we get up towards Winter Sports Lane. Now this as a side road more than a drive will get a full crossing treatment, so pavement markings, detectable warning surface, the curb will be rebuilt. And again, you can see some of the clearing limits. And then we have just one more slide. Sorry about the blue dots there. There we go. Continuing along as we get to Whitecap Business Park, which is where Evergreen Family Health is, and that is where the project will end. The next phase will pick up here and carry it towards Rosignol Park, where the existing sidewalk on the other side of the road carries it all the way up to Vermont 2A. So the next steps after tonight, we are well into design. We've got preliminary plans ready and under internal review. Those will be submitted to both the town and VTrans by the end of the month. Once we get those comments back and address anything that needs to be addressed, we can enter the right-of-way phase. And we put that in as a year, just to give a little wiggle room because it can be a variable process. Once we get right-of-way clear, we'll move right into final plans and specifications, which would be towards the end of 2026. And all going according to this schedule, the bidding would be in early 2027 and construction would be done by the fall of 2027. That's really it. It's a pretty straightforward project in terms of design and construction, but I'd be happy to go back and talk about any of the slides or answer any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you, Eric. Any questions from the board?
I'm personally very glad to see this. I think that, connecting, especially because that is also the home to a DCF office, and I think it's imperative that there is walkability to that office for the folks who are served by that particular office. So wonderful to see it. How much of sidewalk is then left on Industrial Avenue, or how much area is left on Industrial Avenue that's not connected?
It's just really a few hundred feet, but it's a challenging spot. I think some of it, as you approach Rosignol Park, drops off steeply. So it'll be a little bit more tricky of a project, less straightforward than this one, but it's only going to leave a few hundred feet, and then that'll have all of Industrial Ave covered with sidewalk on one side or the other.
Okay. Especially that we're gonna have this beautiful new pedestrian bridge on Industrial Avenue. It'd be nice if there was a sidewalk right up to it.
Yeah, that scoping study I mentioned did cover that segment, so it's unlikely the town would have to go through that process again. So it's just a matter of, securing a grant funding, and then if there's just that one segment left, that makes it pretty appealing to the grant voters at VTrans. So that would be considered a low-hanging fruit at that point once this one's done.
This, looking at the design reminds me, when I was on a committee and some folks were up with sidewalks, rec pass, and they were surprised at how much the engineering cost, and they said, I remember when planning sidewalks, you just needed a map and a ruler. I guess this is exactly what this is. It's a nice straight line. Just looking at the design, the sight lines, are we clearing, is the plan to clear enough trees so that people can safely, if they're riding a bike or something across there, they won't get hit by the cars coming out of the Aston Johnson Drive or the Whitecap?
Yeah, the sidewalk is less so designed for bikes than pedestrians, but there will be adequate sight lines for cars at that stop bar to be able to see both directions of the sidewalk. There'll be enough clearing through there. And And frankly, the trees there today are not super thick, so, we don't want to take more than we have to. But the sightline should be good, and that's something we'll keep in mind as we go forward.
Have we been in touch with the property owners, or is easements or right-of-ways going to be an issue, or is that, this has been in the works a long time? I'm sure it's not a surprise to anybody.
So,
Yeah, Christine, maybe you can speak to that.
yes, thank you, Eric. So yes, a letter did go out to the property owners notifying them about the meeting that we're having tonight. We'll be following up with them once we have some more information and some plans in hand to kind of talk through a little bit more about what's going on. These plans that you're seeing today they're pretty new and coming together, so I wanted to make sure that we had those available to show them and talk to them about that.
It looks like this sidewalk is only crossing driveways. Eventually, it will cross over Industrial Avenue to the pedestrian bridge. Any plans or thoughts about having, some type of a lighting system in the road, like we have in front of the old brick church? Some type of
That's-
safety for road.
Yeah, that's something we'll look at when we get to that phase. We haven't started looking at that phase of the project yet.
But there's no need for that now along Industrial Avenue. I don't see any businesses where people would really be crossing the road, are there?
Right, this phase of the project won't require any road crossings, so we won't be looking at that as part of this phase.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? So, no formal action is required. So,
No,
we're-
would you mind if anybody in the public had questions? If we
No,
took
actually,
their
yeah.
questions, that would be,
Any questions from people in the audience?
thank you.
Me too.
Well, thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Eric. Next on the agenda, Village Vibrancy Project, Library and Town Green. The village is vibing. So, Eric, do you want to lead off?
Yeah, I'll kick things off. I think everybody's here. John, Lucy, trustees, Kevin, Bonnie. Okay, we got everybody. So I just want to kick things off here. I want to start by recognizing and introducing our incoming library director, Kevin Unrath. He'll be starting in early April. The trustees and I are very excited to have him join our town team. Kevin was selected after an extensive search for the position following Jane Kern's retirement last December. His resume includes experience as a director at the Isley Library in Middlebury, the Pearson Library in Shelburne, and most recently the Vermont Department of Libraries, providing support for library operations to communities statewide. So Kevin will get started in a couple weeks, jumping in at an exciting time for the town and the library. And Kevin's here this evening, and he just wanted to just introduce him and say hi for a minute. Yeah, for the microphone.
Speech.
I'm really just here to put a face to a name and say hello. I have just a couple of words, but I'm here more in learning mode. I was very impressed by all of my interactions with everybody during the interview process, so thanks for making it very easy to decide to come here, Eric, and Bonnie and the staff and all the trustees and the friends and the volunteers. I also have taken advantage of some of the online information about the Village Vibrancy Project and seeing the deliberative process that you all have been taking to this potential project, and I appreciate the thought that you've put into it. Looking at the statistics and the use of the library, it's clear that Williston loves its library, uses it a lot, and I'm excited to be a part of that. So I'll keep it at that. But thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to starting in about 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Great, so.
Welcome. Thank you.
So now I thought I'd just kind of reset our conversation about this exciting project we've been looking at here. So at its last meeting in February, the Select Board received an overview of the Village Vibrancy Project, encompassing the renovation of the Dorothy Allen Memorial Library and expansion of the library, looking to potentially double its size, and a refresh of the town green facilities. Number of folks here this evening to answer questions and help the select board with its dialogue on this project. Our project engineer, John Hemmelgarn, Lucy Thayer, who did the landscape architecture for the green in the plans, a number of members of the library board of trustees, our interim director and assistant director, Bonnie, Lord Meunier, and you met Kevin, our incoming director. So for the select board, the decision point is whether to proceed with the project further and the overall project scope. The next step we've set up for this process is a capital campaign feasibility study with a consultant we've engaged over the last several months. Before that work can really begin, the scope of the project needs to be set. It's critical for that study as will be a basis to discuss the project. The conclusions from that feasibility study will be based on the scope that's tested and analyzed. Changes to the scope after that study could alter the results that we received from it. So should the select board have any major scope changes for the project for what's been transmitted by the library board of trustees, they should be identified and discussed with the trustees to arrive at a final project scope. And certainly that may not all happen this evening. You have time and other meetings coming up to continue this dialogue. You had it presented last time. So I also want to mention, and just thinking ahead to potential financing for this project, it's a number of steps away, but just for context, in my connecting with the town attorney, should the board proceed with asking the voters to consider a bond for this project, the bond article the town attorney suggests should be for the full project amount. The actual bond sale amount would be determined less any other funding sources that are identified for the project if there was a fundraising component, additional grants received for the project from moving forward. So that's all I really had to kind of set the table for the board. It's time for the board on the agenda to discuss the project, have any questions answered by our team here, and staff look for any direction, any additional questions you want answered as you talk about the scope of this project. So I will turn it over to the board.
Does anybody from the library trustees want to make a little comment for, or you don't have to, I'm just asking.
We're completely behind the project as it stands. And we think it'll be a project that will take our library further and for the future for a long period of time. And I think, as mentioned before, the extra community rooms, or the community rooms that are going to be there, and just an upgrade of the facilities will mean there's more room for all of the books and the library of things and all of the different programs that the library provides, and that we'll be able to have more of that, reach more people, and be even more of an asset to the town. So, and actually, I think in our discussions of the whole project, having it incorporate the town green, I think is value added for the town. And I think it'll just add to the vibrancy of the town. And we think that that's part of the whole project. And we hope that you agree. Thanks.
So the question for discussion tonight is the scope of the project. Is the board comfortable with the scope? Do we want to ask for modifications? Do we want to make changes? What's the pleasure of the board? So.
I think I'm just a little confused. Maybe just clarify for me, Eric, why we're deciding the scope 6 months or 8 months before we consider a bond. And I think what you were trying to tell me is that this is required for our consultant to go out and do the fundraising assessment?
Yeah, so the recommendation for the capital campaign feasibility study is to have the scope of the project envision that the town wants to move forward with. Then the data from that feasibility will help determine if there's a potential for a capital campaign. And it also is an opportunity to gauge community input on the project. So if the board were to, after that point in time, make a substantive change to the scope, a different scope would have been tested as part of that feasibility. So the results could be varied. That recommendation from the consultant on the fundraising side of it. Certainly it's the board's prerogative of what it wants to do for the scope along the way, and for the if there's a potential bond note. But and thinking about that process, those were points to consider from the feasibility consultant for fundraising.
I think, as I said last time, people would not be surprised to know that I'm uncomfortable with the total amount of the bond, given that we probably have 5 other bonds to consider in the next couple of years. So I'm a little, cart before the horse, chicken and egg kind of thing. It's like I love the design. I love having the green included. I'm not in love with $13 million. I could consider, there's 2 things. There's 2 things that I'm willing to consider right now. One is fundraising to get down to something closer to 10, and the other would be to take the green out and consider it a separate project. So those are the 2 things I'm just kind of considering in my head. I'm just not, I don't want to, I'm not sure how to incorporate those in the question that you're asking.
Would it be helpful to you to have that, the green piece separately, like to look at the numbers, like if we did just the library without?
It's $1 million, I know that.
So yeah, okay.
So, one thing, when you were talking about the scope in the first place, before we talked about the fundraising having to come after the bond, which I'm still questioning, I could see if you went, if the folks went out and they said, hey, we're interested, how are you feeling about donating to a project that is the library and the green, and someone says, I love the green, I'll give you $1 million, and then we don't make enough, so we cut the green out. That
Right.
I could, so then I was thinking, well, but that seems like something you could talk to. This is the 2 pieces. If we don't get enough money, we can't do the green. That would be, frankly, that would be the first thing that I would let go before I started messing with a library design. That's where I was with that right now. It's $1 million.
Can I address the green issue again?
Yeah, please.
Part of the reason why this kind of went over towards the green was because of the band. So the way the expansion of the library was going to be, that was going to kind of interfere where the space of the band was. And so talking with the band members and talking to the director and talking about their needs ended up kind of, that evolved to, we're going to have to do something in order to be able to make those folks happy, because there's a very strong, people love the library, but people also love the band during the summer. And so by incorporating that kind of performance space that can be used not only by the band, but some other uses that we don't even know about, and having to do that, then kind of having that whole idea about well, let's just, work around it and have the green. So I think that the band folks and the people that feel very strongly about the band is a nice, there's a lot of people from Williston that want to do that.
Didn't we put the band shell back where it was originally? I thought we weren't moving it anymore. Did I misunderstand?
Well, where it was originally, I don't know when.
I thought we were going to move it, and then they ended up putting it back essentially where it is now.
I don't know. I don't know that history.
It can be
They move
either location.
It can- yeah.
The new feature is the performing platform.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I want to do the whole project. I would rather lose the green than take $1 million out of the library. That's what I'm weighing.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I understand that
Okay.
completely, but then I was trying to tell you about the reason
How it
behind
got
the
there,
green
yeah.
with the band.
Yeah,
So-
okay, thank you.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
First, I want to say how much I love the library. I use it a lot. Hello, nice to meet you. But I have a question. My understanding of the form-based code and the growth center was a way to kind of unify Williston and have like a town center. And I'm just questioning this library expansion and maybe like not having like a satellite library or something in the town, in the growth center. And I wonder how, you know, people who don't live like where I do, a mile away, can access the library, especially people who don't have a car. So to me, when I think of Williston, it's like a string of, like a necklace of neighborhoods. And the growth center is sort of like a unifying concept. So I know it seems like the project is pretty advanced, there's, you know, designs and everything, but I just have questions about that, the wisdom of that. And I'd like to see a little more visionary, I mean, I know like adding on to the existing building is easier than like, you know, doing something on a, you know, off-site. But I wonder if anybody can speak to that.
Do you want to speak to that, that in the process that we went through about deciding and all the location and all that, or maybe John wants to speak to it? I don't know if, you know, and the.
John, if you can come up.
She's trying to get Carlin.
I'll say anything you don't say.
So I'm John Hemmelgarn, resident and also the project architect for this proposed building. I think it was a good point, and it was very specifically part of the original feasibility study project that we undertook initially. And I would say we did a fairly thorough job of testing that very question. And the results came back extremely strongly that the majority of people really wanted to see the library stay right where it was. I think a lot of that has to do with, I mean, I understand that the concept, and we pressed this point of how it would be closer, it could be closer to the growth center and at the Test Corners. But the proximity of the existing library to the Williston Central School, I think trumps almost everything that is out there otherwise. Not to mention that it is part of, and is seen as part of the green at this point. And so, therefore, it's an extremely valid question. I look at you and I say that, and it's one that we really tried to test during that first feasibility phase. And so, you know, we've got a lot of data that backs up the fact that library really, there's a huge desire for that library to be where we're proposing it. I would, and maybe Bonnie can speak to this, I know Jane could, about the costs that are associated with a satellite library, a second branch, from, I think, a staffing and a collection standpoint. So we also explored that possibility, and that got even less traction than moving the library totally. So anyway, that's just a little recap of kind of that very first phase. We're now at the end of the second phase of this project. So,
Well, I'd add too that the library has the bookmobile, which is a really great asset that we have to bring the library around town to different neighborhoods as well. And that's a program that's been growing in recent years.
John, while you're all warmed up, Gene's thought about separating out the green from the library expansion, is that, how hard would that be to do?
from a construction standpoint,
Construction, architecture?
I think there's some disruption to the green's going to happen regardless. We're still going to consume part of the green with this proposal. So, but I think we could draw a line kind of between the library half of the green and the library 40% and the other 60%, and leave it pretty much untouched. I think it would be possible to save Eric, I don't remember now. And again, I have no notes with me really tonight, so I'm not speaking totally from memory. I think it was, what, 700,000 or 800,000, something?
A little over 8, I think, close to $1 million.
I gave it the soft costs, that's how I got my $1 million.
Okay, and I think, and that's possible, though the soft cost can't be done proportionately because it's all part of the same time frame of construction. But even so, it is a sizable amount of dollars. And I think as I've presented here more than once, from the very beginning, we've been very sensitive to what we're doing to the green and that we are using up some of it to put this expanded library. I think it's something that we've just been concerned about from the beginning and wanting to make it a better place through this project.
Thank you for that. It's important.
I think the green expansion would include cutting all the trees down,
Not all of them.
except for maybe 2.
Not even close to all of them. We're going to be keeping quite a good number of them, including all the ash trees along Route 2, and most of them. Now, there is a number of them behind the building where the parking lot and the building is going that would have to come down. So,
Regardless of the green expansion.
regardless of the green expansion. Yeah, the green expansion would not take out very many trees at all. I'm sure Lucy can find a way to put the paths through without going through the trees. Yes, she said yes.
So Eric, if we just move forward with the project as is, what's the implications?
Yeah, so the next step is to do the feasibility testing for a capital campaign and ultimately seeing what those results say and deciding if the town wants to launch a capital campaign for a fundraising component of this project for additional project budget as opposed to just public debt through a bond vote. That's the short-term phase to get that question answered for the board. Ultimately, the board has to decide. Unless there's a very large donation to cover the whole cost, conceivably there's going to be a public debt needed for this project to occur, and deciding, does the board want to move forward with that, and on what timeline does the board want to move forward with that?
So if we go forward with the whole $13 million and we do this, have this assessment done, and it comes back and it says, wow, we think between $2 and $4 million, that sounds like really feasible, then we'll make a decision about, we can have discussion about whether or not you bond for the whole thing, or if you fundraise first, that's the other option. If it comes back and it's like, wow, there's, the economy, whatever, we're getting zero interest in this, there'd still be time for the board to reconsider the project.
Yeah, it's, it gives you another piece of information to consider in the overall funding picture here. Mm-hmm. So that was my thought, where before making the decision on the bond, understanding kind of what all those different elements are potentially for the funding piece of the project. And ultimately, this is a feasibility. It's gonna test it in the community, see if there might be viability for a campaign. But then, that campaign has to occur, and there's different elements in planning to that our consultants can help us navigate along with staff. But that's one potential pathway for the board right now, is to get that additional information, test what the scope is as transmitted, and revisit it at that point and make a decision of where you go from there.
I think either way, this won't be ready to go before the town vote until March of '26, correct? Or is there
At least.
Certainly, it's the board's discretion. There's thought if you want to have a special separate meeting for a bond measure like this, technically you can call for a special town meeting within 60 days, or 60 days you need to warn it, or 30 to 40 days prior. For a bond, there's requirements for public notice and everything, but certainly something like this, you want to have a good runway for public education and engagement around the project. So certainly it's the select board's decision when it may want to consider a bond vote, if that corresponds with town meeting day or is off as a special town meeting later this year, another point next year.
My experience is if you wait until March, you don't break ground that year. And that means you're putting it off a whole nother year, and you're increasing all your costs just that much more. So I mean, I had in my head this fall.
Yeah.
What's the timeline on a feasibility study for the fundraising?
Yeah, the next steps would be, Bonnie's done a lot of great work in the interim, well, after Jane's retirement, working on a case statement. So that encompasses, they have a methodology that the consultant uses. They would start that work likely in later April, and then they planned they could have this delivered probably by mid to late June would be their timeline. So the board could consider that late June, early July, most likely at that point.
This may be a basic question that I should know the answer to, but what would a fundraising campaign look like? I mean, weekly bake sales? It's a lot of cookies.
Yeah, I'll do my best, and feel free anyone else to step in here that's been a part of something like this in the past. But certainly you want to identify your goal, but before you have a public-facing component of that, there's a soft and more of a donor base of maybe larger components for the fundraising that occurs for the public-facing side of it. So you want to secure those pledges early, and it's good to have a capital campaign committee, also guidance from some either kind of offering their services as part of that committee that does this professionally, or working with a consultant as well. But thinking especially for something of this scope, for likely a multi-million-dollar fundraising goal, it's going to have really a lot of good planning and horsepower behind it to make it effective. I don't think the town's trying to raise $50,000 or $100,000 here. You're talking a larger number than that. So you want to be resourced adequately and planned adequately for it. And should the town want to go that direction to launch that campaign, you'd be thinking about maybe later this summer or fall, and then the discussion about potential bond vote and when that occurs. And I think probably talking with our fundraising feasibility consultants would be good for the board to, they've done this with most library fundraising projects in the state, so they have a good handle on it. And then working through those questions for the public debt and the timing for that. So got a lot on your plate to think about. It's no small project. I think, the amount of money we're talking here with the way inflation's been since the town's had a large bond note would be, probably the largest the town's ever asked the voters to approve. I think the Public Works garage in 2014 or so was about 6 or 7 million. Inflation factors into this as well, but you have time and many steps to think about, and there's no rush, I'll say, but there is inflation, so.
Bring your sweet tooth, Dad.
Putting it out there right now, if there's anybody, while we're having a national conversation about the importance of libraries, if anybody would like to fund our local library, feel free to let us know.
Well, would it be appropriate and would it make sense to have the fundraising people, I don't know the term, come and speak to the board?
Yeah, I think they'd certainly be open to that. I can see they could have time at your next meeting potentially. I've learned a lot from chatting with them. I don't want to put Kevin on the spot or anyone, but and Kevin was in Shelburne. Shelburne did their expansion while he was there, and there was some different elements and discussions that select board had, I believe, around that as well. So,
what's the consensus of the board? Would people want to hear from those folks?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Can we?
Yeah, I'll reach out and see if we can get them lined up for your next meeting.
Yeah.
And Eric, I know this is a big ask, but could you give some thought, doesn't have to be tomorrow, but timing out or laying out our other bond decisions over the next 5 years? I got a communications tower, ambulance, a fire truck, community center, communications tower, did I already say that? And the village, the sidewalk, village to Taft's Quarter sidewalk. I mean, those are all things that are sort of, people are on us for in the near future, so.
Yeah, the ambulance was something we had to order because of the 3-year build time. That's about $500,000. That would need to be on town meeting next year because that's when it will be delivered. Fire trucks are taking about the same time, 3 years from order to delivery. We're working on the RFP for that right now, so I have a sense of what the cost is. Then we need to sign a purchase order to get our spot in line for it to be built in 3 years, and then it's likely going to be over $1 million for a new fire engine replacement, so bonding the year that's going to be delivered. And then the radio communications tower project, that's something in the short term to really be thinking about, and we're working on the permitting for that right now. So those are kind of the big three known quantities moving ahead. So you have this, and then the community center project, it's a little further off as we're thinking about that one as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, with a very expensive library, it's even further off, and that's what's going in my head right now, is that I would like to do all of it.
I've been told that the Shelburne Library is a great example of, you know, an addition onto an existing library.
Yeah. So we built the new library in Shelburne attached to the old town hall. And so it was an addition, a very modern-looking addition onto a historic building. It was, we actually, to get back to the fundraising question, we did raise a little over $1 million in about a year. It was a $6.5 million library project, and then a $1 million site project. I don't know why 1 million is how much a site costs.
Site costs
but
$1
that's
million.
how much the site costs. And the majority of the fundraising was through a small number of donors giving a large amount of money. So you do somewhat of a silent campaign, working with people who have the ability to give and the desire to give. And then the last, typically that's 90% of the money that you raise. And then the other 10% is the public-facing side of things, the bake sales and bricks and whatnot. But that fundraising that you do at the earlier, quieter phase is really the bulk of the fundraising that you do. And that's what the feasibility study and then the consultant is very helpful with. So.
And I believe that the library in Shelburne is also next to the middle school.
We're right up the road from the community school, which is also it was a K through 8 school, yeah.
K through 8.
So very similar situation.
It's kind of I don't know if it's a historic area or not, but.
Yeah, the downtown area of Shelburne is a historic district,
Okay.
and the town hall is as well. Right up the road from the Shelburne Museum.
Yeah, I've seen the library before. I've always wanted to go in there and just see how it was done, you know? I know it's next to the school.
Yeah, you should stop in. If you don't know where it is, it's where the giant pencil sculpture is. You can't miss it from Route 2.
Be a fun field trip. Now that the Shelburne store, village store, should be selling creamies again, right? Across the green.
Going.
So I don't know if we've given very much guidance tonight.
What I'm hearing from the board is, continue the dialogue. Let's bring our fundraising consultant, and they're better suited to answer, all good questions from the board. They're better suited to answer those in their experience with working with communities on these projects. So we can see if we can get them lined up to answer your questions about what that looks like and what that process looks like.
Okay. Is there other content or questions from the board? Are people comfortable going on to the next agenda item?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
This is Greta's favorite part.
It's my favorite. Not that I don't love the library, but I do like to talk about wastewater.
Just not wastewater.
Has Matt been summoned?
I just texted him.
Okay.
He'll be over in momentarily.
We are a little bit ahead of the schedule, which is rare. Do
Nice
people
to
want
have
to take
full
a?
house
Make sure
there.
Ellie knows that this is not normal.
Yeah. Do people want to take either we can take a 5-minute break or we can go handle some of the manager's reports?
Yeah, I mean,
All right. Eric, can we cover some of the manager's report?
Sure. That's at the planning commission. They're next door in the annex.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I'm sure if you reach out to the planning staff, they'd be happy to sit down with you and share the presentation from tonight.
Was tonight
I'm really disappointed that nobody wanted to stay and talk about wastewater.
I know.
It's very,
Not always.
You know what, they just haven't experienced it the way we have.
there's a lot of interesting things with wastewater.
I've had a lot of
Part of the TIF
conversations
study.
with community members about it, so
Was tonight also the same night they're having the Vermont Trans Route 2A project?
that was yesterday.
Last
Yesterday.
night,
Yes.
Big turnout.
you want,
I zoomed.
with manager's report?
Yeah, please.
So as, to start some staff news, met Kevin, our new library director, really excited to have him on board, brings a great experience in Vermont libraries to Dorothy Alling. Also, other news, we've hired a new conservation planner, David Maroney. He'll be starting right at the end of this month. We've also hired 3 new career firefighters. They'll begin their 8-week recruit academy later this month. And we've filled out a vacant buildings and grounds position, hiring Alex Roy coming up. So a lot of work with hiring. So I thank Aaron and my colleague Aaron, the assistant manager, for leading a lot of these processes, working with department heads to get our staff almost fully staffed. So continue to work there. Just mentioned the V-Trans Route 2A project will be getting underway in April. Public meeting last night. Certainly going to be a lot going on there on Route 2A. Expanding the roadway after they moved all the power lines was step one. So that'll be ongoing this year. I was at the State House last week on Thursday, following up with our conversations about the former barracks property. I chatted with House Corrections and Institutions. I followed up with them from testimony last year. I submitted the Select Board's letter after our discussion in January about the decision whether to pursue a first right of refusal on the building. Bulk of our conversation, I focused on the town's desire to preserve an opportunity to acquire a right-of-way or easement on the southern end of that parcel for it to build a connector grid street that was envisioned as a CERC alternative project over 10 years ago, making sure we secure that right-of-way and easements when we have opportunities to. So the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services was there as well, and I chatted with her, jumped in during testimony and after testimony, and BGS is certainly interested in connecting with the town as they get further along with selling that building and continuing that dialogue. Sounds like it's nothing they're planning to put on the market right away. They've got some things stored in there, so it could be at least a year before they look at that. So the bottom part had a number of snowmobiles and boats in there. They think they need to relocate them somewhere else. It's ongoing.
Not like the state needs money or anything.
And then other legislative item, the local option tax bill, increasing the local share of that. It's currently 70-30. Share with you the report from the Joint Fiscal Office. And the legislation that introduces moving that to an 80-20 split. VLCT sent an update yesterday. This is going to be attached to the flood relief bill in the legislature, this component of it. Part of the pilot fund surplus is being talked about assisting flood damaged communities, so it also built in this change in the formula. So I'm hearing that's going to be continue to be discussed in committee. It's maintaining the 80-20 split as introduced. It seems to have a lot of support and momentum behind it in the legislature. So we'll see as we're past crossover now. We'll be getting, we'll be ramping up here for the finish line in April or May. So really, if that is what is adopted by the legislator and the governor, that the town really stands to benefit from that. My rough estimate is, it could be upwards of $500,000 or more. It's all dependent on the sales receipts, but that type of change for that revenue could yield that for the town moving ahead. So it makes me think of some of these capital items on the town's list moving forward and how that could be leveraged moving forward as well to help some capital savings accounts for these projects moving forward. I think my quote in the paper, I said, it's a good problem for the select board to have. It's a public policy decision of how to utilize that additional revenue. So something to stay tuned for. We should have an answer for that in the next couple of months. And I'd have to check and see when the horizon would be for it to be implemented, but it could be as soon as July 1st, I imagine. So FY26, some more money in potentially.
So it sounds like they're taking the surplus and instead of giving it back to towns that paid in, they're using it for flood relief.
$1 million of it. I think there's about a $10 million surplus in the pilot fund. And then a number of towns just adopted a local option tax at town meeting day. One of the larger ones, Hartford, down in the White River Valley area. So they got this surplus because so many more towns were also paying into it, and they could recalibrate the formula accordingly for the pilot fund moving forward. I'll have to check and see where the legislation writes, where it is right now for those other funds and where those would be applied to. Because we were advocating for it to be proportionally returned to municipalities that collected it in the first place. So there's potential we will get something from there as well, and be thinking about where that could be applied to. I don't know, Williston's share of the 9 million would be, but it's likely a
Could be a big chunk of a fire truck.
chunk of it. Yeah, so.
Or an entire ambulance.
Let's make sure my text went through to Matt.
One of the things we see every meeting is the volunteer vacancies. Is there something we can do to push advertising for these positions? Because these are such critical roles to like the functioning of our town and in our decision-making and lots of things. And so, and I know there's lots of folks who are looking for ways to get involved, but I'm not sure that they're necessarily connecting with these opportunities.
Yeah, we've been trying some more targeted outreach based on positions, but yeah, any opportunity I think for any elected official or volunteer official right now too, who knows someone who might be interested. It's a larger list. It's likely going to increase a little bit as we look for the reappointments around the turn of the fiscal year as well. So I know, like, for example, the DRB opening that John, who was here earlier, served on that for about 10 years, and he didn't seek renewal last June, and we haven't had any applicants for that open DRB seat in almost a year right now, and that's of all these, they're all good, important roles, and there's things I've been saying here for a long time.
I know Terry's hoping someone will come forward for health officer. Make a plug for it all the time.
Plug him into everything.
Shirley, would you mind just poking your head in the planning office to let Matt know we're all set? Oh, that could be him right there, too.
Maybe it accidentally got locked on the way out.
We should all greet him with silent frowns.
Yes.
There it is.
He wouldn't believe it. He knows I'm so excited for him to talk about this.
Evening.
All set.
You texted me or not, I was halfway here anyway.
Oh, that's okay.
Good evening, Matt.
Good evening.
We've been anxiously waiting.
Kind of like Christmas Eve for some of us when you wastewater allocation ordinance amendment.
No less than former select board member Jeff Fairs was next door at our multi-use path scoping meeting, and I said, do you want to go over
And he said no?
find some math errors in my memo? Eric, I think I'll join the meeting and try to project.
Oh, sure.
And give me just 1 second. It's easier to talk through if everybody can see what I'm talking about.
I was cleaning up some old papers, and last year we got a fancy slide presentation.
Well,
Colored graphs.
Color graphs and pictures of buildings. Fancy.
We don't want too graphic, though.
No, we don't.
I mean, we did have a field trip to the wastewater treatment facility, so.
And a glass of water before we left.
Every 3 years, select board schedule, you get a fancy presentation.
Now, tonight, I'll just share the memo itself, and we can all imagine our favorite buildings in town while I talk, or maybe our favorite future buildings, I'm not sure. So what I have for you tonight is a proposed attachment A to the sewer allocation ordinance, for fiscal year 2026. Sorry, I'm still getting some feedback through mine, and I'm not sure why, Eric.
Oh, is it lagging?
No, I'm getting audio feedback, and my mic's off. And my speaker's muted. There, I think that should do it. Okay. So as I said, this is the recommended attachment A to the sewer allocation ordinance for fiscal year 2026. The way Williston sewer allocation ordinance works is that it calls for this annual update called attachment A, by which the select board establishes the amounts of new sewer capacity that will be made available for purchase for users in different categories, commercial, industrial, residential, environmental mitigation, and so forth. So this is a proposed attachment A. It's also an opportunity to just give everybody a checkup on the state of sewer capacity in Williston, how it's being currently utilized, what are some of the factors that affect how much wastewater we send across the border to the plant in Essex Junction, and where we're at in relationship to our overall capacity. And just a reminder, this attachment A and the sewer allocation and ordinance in general are meant to support the goals and objectives of the current Williston Comprehensive Plan, which is still the 2016 to 2024 plan. So, supporting growth in the places where the town has planned for growth, not supporting growth in places the town hasn't planned for growth, and being responsive to the demands of the market while also managing the rate of growth in town are all goals within that town plan. So I'm going to go over a few of the trends in current sewer usage and how we arrive at understanding how much we have available. And I do want to mention in the various categories that attachment A addresses, I will be recommending some gallons per day capacity be available, specifically should there be a approved expansion to the library. So new public facilities, it's not a category that we usually put allocation in. So in order to allocate available capacity, we have to understand how much capacity the town has available to allocate. That starts with how much capacity do we own at the plant in Essex Junction, which we share with the city of Essex Junction as well as the town of Essex. And so for fiscal 26, we are going to own 1,130,000 gallons per day of capacity. And that is a number that shows the conclusion of the 50,000 gallon per day purchase that we were under agreement with the Tri-Town to buy. So we don't have another agreement going forward right now. We've bought all there is to buy for the moment, and we're at 1,130,000. So that's number one in my list of things you need to know in order to know how much capacity you have. How much do we have available? How much are we using currently? How much are our users using? And I'll go over how we look at that, basically by auditing the daily flow measurements that are taken at our pump station that pumps all of our wastewater to the plant. What have we sold to users, but it hasn't come online yet? There are still some folks out there holding capacity that was sold a long time ago, so we do have some gallons in that category. And then a 7% reserve, which is simply the number our engineer Aldrich and Elliott recommends that we own but do not allocate to any particular use. And so the only thing to know about the 7% reserve is whenever the total amount of capacity we own goes up, that number goes up too, because we just keep using 7%. So back to number two on my list, we know what we own. How much are we using right now? Well, the answer for calendar year 2024, our most recent complete set of data was 632,469 gallons per day on average. It's a pretty significant decrease from the average gallons per day that we saw last year, almost 100,000 gallons per day different, and I'll go into a little bit about why. There are a number of things that impact flow. One of them is rainfall, and that looks like that was probably a pretty significant factor in comparing those two calendar years. So we had a lower flow year, and there are ways that flow increases, like when we connect new users or people use more water. There are also ways that flow can decrease by action of the town. Elimination of sump pumps in basements that are discharging to our system, which they're not supposed to. So when Public Works finds one of those, they inform the owner that, hey, that sump pump needs to pump to the outside, not into our system. Also correcting any leaks in the system. Sewer pipes leak in, not out. So anytime we have a crack in a pipe or a piece of infrastructure we replace, we are preventing groundwater or surface water from entering into that system and incurring its cost of treatment. So just looking really quickly, this is the chart I update for everybody every year. Average daily sewer flows since 1992, all the way at the far end of the blue line. The red line doesn't start till a little while later because it's the 5-year average. And when we determine how much we're currently using for the purpose of figuring out how much we want to sell in the upcoming year, the practice of the select board has been to, in terms of the chart, look at the red line and the blue line and use whichever one is higher. In this case, it's the 5-year average. It's a little higher, and the recommendation would be to use that number rather than last calendar year's slightly lower number in determining how much we have left to make available to new users. And I talked a little bit about, well, geez, it goes up and down. Why is that? So this is a little odd to get your brain around, but it's an apples to apples comparison between how different was the sewer flow this year from the average of the 5 years before, and how different was the rainfall this year compared to rainfall from the 5 years before. So it's both lines here are the percentage deviation from the 5-year average. And what it does show, I think graphically, at least in more recent years, is there's at least a rough correlation between wetter years have higher average flows. And we definitely see this when we look at the daily logs. The highest flow day of the year was actually the same day of the year the last 2 years. I have it in the memo, I think it was July 11th or something like that. And both days were days where we just had massive rainfall. And we had infiltration into the system. And so we're talking about an average daily flow of 640,000 gallons per day. We're talking about using a number that's more like 670,000 gallons per day. But a big day in Williston when it rains a lot or we have a lot of flooding is an over 1 million gallon day. It's a one-off event. It tracks with those extreme weather events. But just to understand, as far as the actual system, we might have 500,000 gallons one day, and then it rains a whole ton and there's some flooding. We see 1 million gallons the next day. Somewhere in the mid 600s are the more typical days, and that bears out in the average as well. So like I said, do we use the blue line or the red line from the previous graph? Use the red line this year, 673,129 gallons per day that we'll subtract from what we own and take that as the amount that we're currently using.
This sump pump going into the system, that's primarily residential or commercial?
Mostly residential. First off, we have more residential properties with basements, and we have more residential properties. And it also tends to be something that, even if it wasn't put in when the house was put in, I think our Public Works Director said it well the other day in a meeting, a couple hours of the plumber, he says, what you ought to have is a sump pump, and run it out to the sewer drain. And so they pop up.
It's prohibited under our ordinance to be discharging into our sewer system with a sump pump.
Yeah, so they must have a plumber come in and do that, or they do it themselves.
Yep. But when Public Works finds them, they ask that they be disconnected. We have had some staff conversations about how much capacity we might be able to recapture, by doing an education campaign around that, or by offering to help people abandon those pumps or route them where they need to go. Given the price of additional sewer capacity, any we can get back from somebody doing something as simple as changing, where the hose discharges to, is worth thinking about. So,
Some type of deterrent maybe to deter people from doing that.
yeah, place that has a more robust permitting regime where you actually administer something like a plumbing code or a building code. It's the kind of thing where, you know, you might not get your plumbing permit until you fixed that thing that isn't allowed by code. We're miles away from doing that sort of thing here in Williston. Our only permit is the zoning permit, as far as development's concerned. But yeah, that's the way it's typically done, is you've got something somebody would like to have, and you condition giving it to them on them correcting that issue.
I just wonder, like, I've never lived in a development, but I could see in a development, you know, somebody having the holes out there, basement window running water into their neighbor's lawn. I know someone who once lived in Colchester in a wet area, and that was a real issue, you know, neighbors putting their pumps in.
Yep. We have our, you know, it goes more to stormwater nowadays than zoning, but we get our fair share of people complaining about, you know, neighbors' water runs onto their property, and it's just kind of like a problem we're always going to have a little bit of, especially in a place where it rains.
So Matt, I didn't catch any of your numbers, but for the record, I did catch the second line on this table. It says calendar 2023 actual.
Ah, there's always one. Thank you.
I thought you left it in there for me to make me happy.
If that's the only one,
That's the only one I
I'll
got.
feel pretty good about it. So that is the 2024.
5-year
And it's not the actual, it's the 5-year average, so we will correct that. So we take the 1,130,000, we subtract what we are using, we subtract what we're committed to that we know isn't online yet, and subtract our reserve. And so this year, we're at just a little bit under 340,000 gallons per day total that we think we would have available to allocate out to new users. So I will take down, I talked about
Stalling, see if they catch that.
capacity not in use and reserve. So this is always a bit of a topic of conversation. The town plan calls for Williston to take a long-term outlook to how it manages its sewer capacity, and sets that 20-year timeline. So the first and simplest thing we can do is take what we have left and divide it by 20. If we sold it every year, all the way down to zero, and if people really used every gallon we sold them, which is something else I'll talk about tonight, what would that yearly number be? So that 339,770 gallons per day divided by 20 is 16,989 gallons per day. We typically sell an average over the last 10 years of a little over 15,000 gallons per day in a year to new users. We sold a lot more than that last year because we sold 27,000 of those 40,000 gallons to the Annex project. You know, so large development comes in, they buy a bunch, and then it starts, you know, to come online. But we actually have more if we divide our capacity by 20 this year than the 10-year average of what we sell. But that is a really incomplete understanding of what's available. And this is the graph I introduced last year, because our users don't use every gallon that we make them buy to support a new use. And what this graph does is it looks at that pattern over the last 20 years. So the red line that always goes up is the cumulative capacity that we've sold. So when someone comes in, I want to build a new whatever, and we say, you need to buy this many gallons per day of sewer. They pay their money, they connect, and it makes the red line go up. The blue line is what we see as a change in flow at the River Cove pump station using that first year, 2003, as the baseline. And, you know, it kind of goes up, it goes down, clearly fluctuating with rainfall and other things. The economy is also a big driver of wastewater. So when people don't go out to eat, restaurants produce less wastewater, people travel less, linen services wash fewer linens, et cetera. But in general, what this graph shows is that the blue line and the red line continue to separate. So we've cumulatively sold since 2003 almost 300,000 gallons of new capacity, but what we actually see at the meter right now is about 200,000 gallons per day. So, as one developer said to me once, yeah, you make me buy it and then I don't use it and then you sell it again to somebody else. And I said, well, more or less. He says, it's okay. You guys have a tighter number than most communities. I don't feel that bad about it. But it's just a reality of the imprecision of how we account for these things. But what it does mean is just taking what you have available to sell and dividing by 20 doesn't really give you the whole picture about what you could be selling. You can sell more than that, or you can go longer than 20 years because people don't use every drop that we sell them. And also, just so you know, and Bruce may go over this with you, if we sell a certain amount of capacity to a new user and they regularly start using more than we sold them, we have a mechanism to go to them and say, you need to buy more. So it's not like we only get one shot at this. If a restaurant is wildly successful and they produce more wastewater, they use more water, we have the ability to go back and ask them to purchase more from this system. So that's that. There's a section of the memo where I always go over some of the ways which the town can continue to work on optimizing its remaining capacity, understanding that it is a finite resource. Some things we might want to start thinking about as our land use goals are updated in our town plan is the first bullet, prioritizing capacity on a geographic basis. In other words, it's not just there's this much capacity for any new house in town, but rather some of it might be for a house that's in the village or the growth center versus for a house in the remainder of the residential zoning district. So focusing that way. Thinking about build out and where does this all end? What is the desired development pattern when all of the or most of the developable land in town has something on it? And how does that line up with what the town owns for capacity? Are there areas that on a 50 or 100-year timeline, the land use goal is not to have it all built out, that there's still some reserve out there, and then aligning capacity with that. Sorry, I went a whole page. As always, purchasing additional capacity if it is available. Whenever I'm asked the question, hey, if there's capacity available, how much should we buy? And I say as much as they'll sell you. Because it is such a limiting factor. There are other limits out there. The water supply is, the ability to supply water is finite, but it pretty well gets fixed when you build another water tower. The capacity of your road system, it's limited. You fix bottlenecks at intersections, you add capacity, and you keep up with it, and you have a lot of time to plan for it. But sewer, there's one industrial site that treats the wastewater that's produced by the town that goes into that system. And if it needs to change or expand, if we are talking about a plant expansion 20 years from now, then this is the year to start talking about it, because it's going to take a very long time, both fiscally and operationally, to plan for something like that.
Can I jump in on that? Is anybody talking about that? Essex? I mean, is there?
I think the RPC, and this is the next year or two, is going to do a wastewater capacity analysis for the county, and that's one of the components. And certainly there hasn't been a new permanent expansion, a large-scale capacity in a number of years in Chittenden County, as I recall. So, it comes back to needing the state permit for the expansion and into the discharge into the Winooski watershed as well. We're doing some work as part of the analysis for the TIF district, looking on just wastewater infrastructure. I know we're not getting into the plant component as much there, but it's something I believe the Tri-Town, which encompasses the three communities that have joint ownership stake in the plant, are talking about in conjunction with the Regional Planning Commission.
Mm-hmm. And then this is, I know, way out in the future. I hope it's way out in the future, but ultimately the lake has a limited capacity to accept the water, at least as we're currently treating it.
Yes, exactly, as we're currently treating it. So higher levels of treatment might be required to discharge more gallons. That's obviously more expensive as well. The other part I'll just sort of mention about that, in the nexus between this particular piece of infrastructure and planning, is you know, if you've been listening to the radio, reading the paper, or listening to me over the last few years, you've heard a lot about housing and housing shortages. And under Acts 47 and 181 of the last two legislatures, we will be receiving housing targets soon from the Regional Planning Commission. So goals about producing additional dwellings in Chittenden County and in Williston. And if you keep reading the paper and keep listening to the radio about this issue, you're going to hear people talking more and more about infrastructure. Because where we've been has been a lot about zoning reform and municipalities changing their rules to accommodate the number of dwellings that are predicted to be needed or are needed based on certain metrics. You know, you've been through a bunch of that here in Williston. But I think all of our Chittenden County communities, where the bulk of even the statewide housing target is likely to land, are looking at our infrastructure, especially wastewater treatment, and looking at that housing number and saying, you know, if you really want to achieve this number, this may go beyond the capacity we currently have. So whether you're in Shelburne, which is doing a large bond for a plant maintenance that adds no capacity as far as I know, or here in the Tri-Town or in Burlington or South Burlington, infrastructure and particularly wastewater treatment is going to be more and more prominent if the state is really truly committed to those housing goals. So,
What about pinch points where we want to do growth, but the capacity does not allow it, you know, just by the size of the lines?
Yep. So some of what Eric was just talking about, you know, thinking through the actual, you know, the mechanics, the nuts and bolts of the system, both the pipe capacity and pump capacity. That's a study that's been done periodically by Aldrich and Elliott for the town of Williston specifically. The last one was 2017.
Yeah, about 7-8 years ago.
And we're working with them now to re-up that, to look at what the thresholds are for needing those upgrades and what those upgrades would need to be.
And also, who pays for that? I know someone who built an apartment building and they had to pay for going from, I don't remember now, a 6 to a 10-inch pipe over a 10-year period. And anyone that's added into that 10-inch pipe for 10 years had to pay a portion of the cost. And nobody added on to it for 10 years. And then once the 10-year was done, a lot of expansion went into it. So coming up with how we're, you know, it's going to be paid for is important too, you know. I mean, do we want to do something similar, or, you know, who pays for that cost of the expansion? Especially when we're looking at Taft Corners, you know, in the TIF district and all that.
Yeah, that's part of what we're studying, to see, you know, if we're going to increase density and kind of the speed of that with what the infrastructure needs are to support that. So the board will probably get an overview of that report in the next couple of months in conjunction with the TIF analysis study, because those are going to inform each other. And we'll be doing the enterprise fund budgets here in May probably. And that'll be a good time probably to go over that study. That they'll probably have that completed next month or so.
Great. This table that I'm showing you right now is just the historic amounts of capacity that the select board has voted to make available. So 10 years worth of attachment A's and an average at the end, so you can see what the record has been. Generally, the amounts made available for sale have gone up a little bit over the years. Some of them have fluctuated a little bit, depending on whether we were really anticipating somebody coming in for permits or not, and wanted to make room for that. But many of the numbers have been relatively stable to slightly increasing over the years. And, you know, without the reserve, which is just a percentage of what the town owns, the average over the 10 years is to make a little under 40,000 gallons per day available through these different categories. And then the next table with somewhat smaller numbers in it is how much the town actually sold in each of these 10 years, 2015 to 2024. And you can see these numbers are generally less. We don't usually quite sell everything, and the average numbers are less as well.
And sold doesn't necessarily mean brought online, right?
No, I mean, it means that somebody had to pay to connect, and pay to reserve that capacity. And as they have to do that as a condition of gaining their permit, but they might not come online, right away.
I was just curious on the one with the red line diverging from the blue line is how much of that was capacity that wasn't being used. It was bought, but was as a reserve that delayed for 4 or 5 years kind of thing.
So I believe at this point, if they don't put it to use within 4 years, we take it back.
Right, so that's new.
But there was people that's was gonna be my question actually, was there was the folks grandfathered in though, right? So there's still capacity that was sold 15 years ago
Yeah,
or
so
whatever.
that's that roughly 38,000 gallons, that's sitting
So
out
that,
there.
but that's not, that 4-year limitation does not apply to them?
No.
Okay, so that may sit there indefinitely, okay.
And they have to pay to hold that capacity. They have a holding fee.
They do, okay. And then we implemented the 4-year kind of time, when was that implemented? 2023? Was it just last year?
I feel like it might have been earlier than that, but I don't
Yeah,
recall.
it would have been an amendment to, it was the sewer use ordinance, separate from the allocation
Yeah.
ordinance, so that, yeah, probably likely over 8 years ago. I don't remember if we've done it since I've been here.
Okay, so we're already seeing folks then having to potentially rebuy capacity that they've already bought? Is that?
Maybe. So if somebody is holding capacity and they want to do any development whatsoever on the land they bought that capacity for, we do require them to spend what they're holding before they buy anything new. But I would say in general, we actually don't have a lot of abandoned projects in Williston. Most people who make it so far that they're buying capacity and pulling permits are actually moving forward. And projects that don't make it over that goal line, so folks may remember the infamous 6-story building that they're up for another 6-month extension on their subdivision right now. So the preliminary permit is still live, but they've never actually crossed that threshold where they needed to buy sewer capacity. So there aren't things like that that sit on this table for very long. So most of what we sell, the user, goes and does the thing they got the permit for.
Cottonwood Crossing is a lot of reserve capacity, correct?
I would have to look and see. They did buy some in that legacy time period where you could hold it forever. I think they have spent all of what they were holding over that long time to build the 3 buildings that are there. I'm pretty sure they need to buy some, if not all, of what's necessary for even like the next building that they build. I can double check that, but I think most of the 38,000 gallons is J.L. Davis Realty on the other side.
Looking at Ellie, remembering this is probably my first meeting too, when we'd spent an hour on this, and I was thinking, is this just hazing the new person?
Lucky me, I got to actually listen to this presentation 2 weeks ago.
That's right.
Yeah, Ellie's had like
She's uniquely used to this.
Really used to this, yeah.
3 of these, including this one a time before.
My favorite part.
Yeah. And then go into just talking about the recommendations for FY26. So these were reviewed by the Planning Commission earlier this month and voted to be moved forward to the Select Board. Not a lot of change in new commercial and industrial. 10,000 gallons per day has been enough for some time for that, and we're not aware of any major commercial or industrial users or proposals out there that are likely to come online in FY26. New residential, I'm just recommending that we return to the amount from the year before last, which is the total of 30,200. The number of dwellings this would support is 240 total. If you cut it up the way I have between 1s, 2s, and 3s, that's bedrooms. It could go any number of other ways. This is probably significantly more dwellings than we will actually see permitted this year, but I know we've got the Summerfield project launching. We've got probably some more units coming online in the annex, although they may take a break and just work through the capacity they've already purchased. We could see units permitted in the Glazer project before the end of this fiscal year. And there's just the outlier of, is somebody going to come in Taft Corners with something? You know, you could have a building that might use 8,000 or 10,000 gallons per day all by itself. Given some of the conversations we're having about trying to understand if there is the potential for development, if the town starts to participate in infrastructure, want to leave some headroom there, so that, you know, when we have conversations with people who are maybe thinking about bringing a project to Williston, especially Taft Corners, we can say, well, here's the policy move that the select board made. There's headroom here if you would want to come in and purchase something.
So the 30,000, that number is fine. I just was curious when I saw, has anybody checked the gallons per day that we're assuming? Is that maybe why we're selling more than we're using?
So that's the number that we make people buy.
Right. Is that, is that too much? Is that?
It's probably a little, I mean, they're always a little more than they absolutely should be, and that's just another way in which the system is conservative about this resource. But our residential numbers are actually lower than what are called the EPRs, the Environmental Protection Rules, which is Vermont's set of rules about how much capacity different uses need to buy or be calculated as using. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is our experience. I think when I first got here, I think a 3-bedroom dwelling was 300 gallons, or had been recently, and it's now 240. That's Williston actually having already made a decision to drop those numbers down a little bit. Aging population,
Smaller
shrinking household size, we are seeing less use than that. And even in some recent work we did where we looked at some of our most densely developed and mixed-use projects, so even projects like Cottonwood that had some commercial in them and even some restaurants, taken all together, what we make somebody buy for capacity and what they're using in those dense projects, they use about 2/3 of what we calculate them needing to buy. So there are ways in the accounting and sort of on paper, you could tighten these numbers up and run a little closer. But the good news is right now, you're going to be selling capacity and then looking at what comes through the pump station every single year for a whole bunch more years. And to me, I think there's actually a fair amount of comfort with that system because, yeah, you make somebody buy that number, it translates into a dollar amount, and it lets you do some short-term accounting, but you see very quickly what's actually showing up in the system.
I'm not complaining about conservative, but I'm also not a developer, so I don't have to pay these things. But I'm thinking affordable housing is paying too much, and I don't know. It always bothers me a little bit when your algorithm is wrong, and you just say, okay, we know it's wrong, we're good. So just, I have some questions when we start, not for tonight, but when we start talking about needing more capacity or some of the decisions about tightening it. It's like,
yep,
the numbers we're using have a lot of wiggle room, so.
I think there's a point where like if we're talking about, for example, the configuration of the system, the size of the pipes and pumps, you really want to talk about real gallons at that point.
Right.
You don't want to assume, well, we sold this person 135 gallons and they're definitely going to give us that because you're trying to size a piece of infrastructure at that point. Mm-hmm. So, or if we're talking about purchase of capacity, you really want to be talking about what are you really seeing for flows, giving the mix of development that's creating them. So I spent all day doing this on Excel for a different project, so I'm actually like really excited about that issue right now, so my apologies.
Yeah, no, but I mean, the RPC would want to know real numbers, not real numbers.
Yeah, so one thing about the housing targets, which the RPC has been assigned to come up with and share with the communities in the next few months, is there's also going to be a working group made up of planners in those communities, and we're going to be feeding back all of that dialogue. Well, what about infrastructure? How should we be planning this against our sewer capacity?
Yeah.
what is some other insight we can give the Regional Planning Commission and the state about what's unique in our community that makes this number more or less challenging to take on board, so.
Thanks.
Sure. We do also have this smaller separate category for residential additions and minor subdivisions. This is usually somebody adding a bedroom, 1,500 gallons. We usually don't sell even half of that. And then we have a separate category for affordable housing. So this is like residential, but it needs to be residential that's meeting our town's definition of affordable. It's a smaller amount of gallons per day. We do have folks in projects that are including affordable, where they're able to buy their market rate capacity out of that prior residential category I mentioned, and then buy for their affordable units out of this category. So that's that amount, I think, virtually unchanged since last year, maybe a little bit more. I might have changed the unit mix. We have the encouraging specific development category. This is the one that if somebody has a new use and they don't have available capacity to buy from any of our other categories, they can come back to you at the select board and ask your permission to buy capacity out of this category. And the only policy criteria is it should be to do something that advances a goal of the town plan. So we've sold it to projects that included affordable homes. We've sold it to a project that brought a general practice medical facility into town. A few other things like that, where there was something that was coming along with what was being developed that met a town plan goal. Oh, we sold this category to Keurig Green Mountain years ago when they needed to expand their operation in order to stay here. As I mentioned at the beginning, planned public facilities. This was the number that caused me to get up from my desk and run upstairs to Bruce and Kim and say, how many gallons per day does the library use right now? And it was in the low hundreds. And I said, well, I'll just put 1,000 in for the expansion to make sure it's covered. And so just if the library project were to advance all the way to a permit stage before June of next year, the town would have its own capacity available to give to that facility. And then there's the 7% reserve. So we're just proposing 7%, 79,100 gallons. And pollution abatement, we haven't used this category in a long time, but if someone was in the sewer service area or adjacent to it and had a failed septic system and the alternative that made sense for them was to connect to town sewer, this is the category they'd be able to do that under. We don't have any large anticipated pollution abatement projects out there, so it would really be probably one home at a time, hence the 1,500. So then the final table just gives you the 5-year history, and in the green column on the end, a summary of the amounts that are proposed for attachment A for fiscal '26. And these are the numbers that the Planning Commission voted on, with the exception that the one I showed the Planning Commission, I didn't have the total number right. Eric reviewed my memo and said, Matt, we actually moved up the schedule and bought all the capacity, so we've got the 1,130,000. I said, okay, so did you adjust the 7%? And he said, yep. And we went through it today, and it's all fixed. So that's your attachment A recommendation. And the action, as far as I understand tonight, would be to ask staff to schedule a public hearing on this, at which point I would return and do this again, but in like 1/8 the time.
Yeah, there's a 60-day period once the ordinance amendment is adopted, so we try to have this public hearing the second meeting in April, so then it can be effective for July 1st after the 60 days.
Further questions or comments?
I think Greta has.
In my head, I was just thinking about like the housing committee encouraging kind of specific developments for affordable housing and things like that. And you know, obviously not for this cycle here, but you know, for future years, the possibility of kind of working with our housing committee to and possibly folks considering developing affordable housing, and not letting the cost of wastewater be a potential barrier. And, maybe just starting some discussions if, that, or, even an additional, like the in-law apartment or, kind of these additional housings, maybe that could be a place where they could step into and work with folks to help facilitate the process. So maybe a conversation to have. Anyway, it's kind of an addendum to this.
You did kind of, the bullets that you were talking about, I was intrigued by for example, water-intensive industrial uses in new hotels may consume a significant amount of capacity that might otherwise be used to help Williston meet its housing goals. That was an interesting comment that we kind of skipped over. It's funny, people always tell me, like, we have too many hotels, and why would we pick up another hotel? You should tell them to put in something else. And I always say, it's not my property, but you could. I mean, if I have no idea I mean, I know what it would look like, but you'd need data that says this is how much this kind of a business uses, and this is how much this kind of a business uses, and it would be complicated. But it was an interesting point to me that if it feels like we're very far away from having to stop building because of capacity, but it would be an interesting tool to say we don't need another hotel, we need 50 more houses.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a lot of restrictions on how finely Williston could cut up these categories as long as it's adopted in the ordinance. You might think about the mixed-use nature of what's seen as desirable in Taft Corners and say, we have a category with a small amount for a building that is entirely commercial, for example, and say, generally our commercial capacity is for commercial components of buildings that are residential upstairs, or just literally saying, we have commercial, residential, and hotel. So we had 2 categories and now we have 3. And in hotel, we're not always going to put capacity or, I don't know that necessarily there will be a wave of hotel construction in Williston.
Hopefully we're close to capacity. But what I was thinking is, like, you could say that you could do that, and then you say, okay, now we got the cap on hotels, but then you have something like, I don't know numbers, Burlington Beer Company comes in, and perhaps that's something we really do want to encourage, but they lose a ton of water,
Right.
even more than a hotel does, and so now are we really being equitable? So
Right.
I know it's very complicated, but I just, thank you for putting it in there. It made me think a little bit about how we use a scarce resource.
Great.
During downturns of the economy, we see hotels turned into affordable housing
Or just the hotels get old.
Yeah.
and turned into affordable
Yeah.
housing.
And we've talked a little bit, it's larger policy discussions for the select board, but, the way these categories are structured, you have all the residential in one bucket, and thinking about the geographical component of that as well. So the board's thinking about investment in the growth center, possible TIF district, wanting to make sure there's the capacity available for that reality to occur. So as you're thinking about the next town plan, the TIF district, how you have this limited commodity that's critical for development, how you want to carve that up in your ordinance and how you want to sell it each year. So those are kind of big fundamental questions for the board to be thinking about moving ahead in the years to come here.
So, any further questions or comments for Matt? And if not, then our question before us is, do we schedule this for a public hearing? So, hearing nothing, is there a motion?
I'll move to schedule a public hearing to receive comments on the proposed attachment A of the sewer allocation ordinance for fiscal year 2026.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. There are no nays. Schedule the hearing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
And Next, did we cover everything on the manager's report?
Just wanted to mention the fire department strategic plan. The consultant is here this week. They had a kickoff this afternoon I went to with some community stakeholders participating, and the next 3 days the department's going to be engaged in really the bulk of that plan. So we should have a finished product, I think, in the next couple of months that will come to the select board, I anticipate. So that is underway.
Okay.
I have one other business item.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's just I passed out from Town Clerk Sarah Mason liquor and tobacco license renewals. There's a table that she put together today. These used to be on an annual basis on April 30th of every year, but changed a couple years ago, and it's always on a 12-month basis from when it was renewed. So this is the renewals that are coming up. These are all renewals, nothing new. We haven't had any violations or concerns with any of these establishments, and staff's recommendation is to approve these as a local liquor control and tobacco control board.
Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second?
Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Hearing no nays, the motion carries. Anything else?
No other business.
Okay. All right. So that would bring us to final thoughts on items from this meeting. Are there any items that we want to circle back on and touch upon before we go to the next executive session?
I mean, for me, it's just the whole CJC thing, and I keep biting my tongue, but I keep wanting to tell folks, nothing is guaranteed in our budget. We could have a recession and not get the 1% that we were counting on. I'm not sure what they really want us to say, but I feel like now that they've come to town meeting, and now that they've come here, some kind of a response feels respectful.
I did meet with Rob yesterday, who spoke this evening, and I'm planning to attend their next meeting on April 6th, I believe, to address some of their questions here as well.
The executive committee?
The CJC Executive Committee.
Yeah. Right, yeah, okay, thank you. That would help. Maybe perhaps they can get the word out to their folks, but.
Yeah, and one thing, the town's experienced this the last several years, where the DOC grant has been for a 1-year period. At one point, it was a 3-year grant cycle, but especially the last 2 years, we've found out in May what the grant funding was going to be, and we've signed the grant agreement in June. And granted, it's changing state agency homes from DOC to AGO, and there's a lot of things in the state budget right now, but it's not a place we haven't been before. I certainly have some thoughts, but I've taken the approach the last couple of years, see what the reality looks like, and if we got in that reality, I can propose to the board some operational and fiscal options to consider at that point, so we're not at a point where we need to decrease services.
I mean, how much money are we talking about roughly?
The state grant's about $130,000.
Yeah.
I know they've put in for about that in the ask at the state level, so could receive that, could receive something less than that, and we have to look in these conversations with Burlington moving forward, kind of what that modeling looks like as well for FY27.
And what's the number we're already committing? Like the grant does not cover the entirety of our,
Our share, we put in around 50,000 from the general fund. We increased that too at the end of the budget, I think closer to 60, and then Heinsberg and Richmond have contributed as well. I think around 15,000 or so.
That's on top of the 130 or part of the 130?
On top of the 130.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
The overall program budget's around 200.
and that's not considering also in-kind kind of pieces, having it housed here and those kind of.
But the
pieces as
exposure
well.
is 130, and that's assuming that the state, after going through all the ramifications of you're making a decision and moving it to Burlington and making all the choices, are just going to say, but we're not going to fund it this year.
Right.
Which seems
Pretty remote.
remote. Yeah.
The advocacy myself and my fellow managers in the county we're pushing was to look at least retain that model for one more fiscal year for, it's built a 15-month runway for planning a really significant change for service delivery as opposed to a couple months. And, appreciate the AGO's office for making that recommendation for moving forward. So yeah, it's same thoughts.
But that's the
some
FY27,
continuity of
yeah.
operations
Right.
and planning process moving ahead.
Well, I appreciate
So it plays out.
them looking out and being concerned about our staff. I think most grant-funded people have to live with that discomfort this time of year, because most grants aren't done at the same time as a municipal budget, but, so I appreciate that they care about our staff and value them as we do. But I would like to kind of calm them down a little bit, that this is not that far outside of operational structures for a town, so. Thank you for handling that.
Any other items? If not, there is a executive session that we need to conduct. So is there a motion?
I'll move that we enter executive session to discuss a possible real estate transaction under Title I, Sections 313A2 of the Vermont statutes, and invite Town Manager Eric Wells to join.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are in executive session, and for the viewing audience at home, the tens of thousands of people, that are, we're not going to be coming back into public session after that. So